All right, we're back. This time we're going to be talking about the tract put out by the Why Islam group, 877 Why Islam, or whyislam.org. This particular tract is called "What Does Islam Say About Terrorism?" What does Islam say about terrorism? Is terrorism the same as jihad? We're going to find out. What does Islam say about terrorism? Well, let's begin by opening up the tract to the center fold. And immediately we're faced with a verse at the very top of the center fold, which says, in part, "If anyone slew a person, unless it be for murder or for spreading mischief in the land, it would be as if he slew the whole people. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of the whole people." Seeming to suggest that that Islam says it's illegal to kill a person, because if you kill one person, it would be as if you killed all of mankind. And conversely, if you save one person, it would be as if you saved all mankind. This is a verse that's very often quoted by our politicians and by Muslim apologists today, to try to demonstrate that Islam is indeed a peaceful religion. I'm going to come back to this verse in a moment because we find it further on the inside. Let me look at some of the highlights that I have in here, some of the issues that I have noted. The tract says, sometimes the religion of Islam is held responsible for the acts of a handful of Muslims. Well, is that true? Is it merely a handful of Muslims that are engaging in violence that we see around the world in the name of Islam? No, it's not. In fact, statistics show that those who we would classify as Islamists or radical Muslims, there are several terms to define them, are not merely a small handful or 1% or a very small, insignificant minority. In fact, statistics show that they're anywhere from 15 to 20% of the worldwide Muslim population. Now, they are still in the minority. What that means is about 80% of the Muslim population do not engage in these sorts of acts of violence, but 20% of them do. And 20% of 1.5 billion people is about 300 million Muslims. Hardly a small minority, hardly a small handful of people, as this tract would seem to suggest. It goes on to ask, could a faith that has over 1.2 billion followers the world over, and over 7 million in America, actually advocate the killing and maiming of innocent people? Well, I find it rather interesting that those who actually do engage in radical acts of violence and do so in the name of Islam cite verses from the Quran as their justification for doing so. Now, if Islam says nothing about this, then why are these verses in the Quran? Why are these people who are engaging in these acts of violence resorting to the Quran to justify what they're doing? This pamphlet seems to suggest that, no, they're not Islam at all. They're not following true Islam at all. What they're doing is outside of the religion of Islam, yet they claim authority from the very Quran itself. We're going to look at some of those verses here in a moment. But don't fall for this particular lie that these guys are actually acting in anti-Islamic ways. They find full justification and they quote their justification in the Quran and an example of Muhammad. Could Islam, whose name itself stands for peace and submission to God, encourage its adherents to work for death and destruction? Well, first of all, the word Islam does not mean peace. The word Islam means to submit to God, simply because it comes from the same Arabic root word, sum, S-L-M, as salam does, which is the Arabic word for peace, does not mean Islam means peace. There are many Arabic words that derive from the root word S-L-M. One of them means to surrender or spare or have your life thrashed. This is one of the ways that Muhammad signed his letters to nearby kings and authorities when he was about to conquer their land. When he sent a letter to the Roman Emperor Heraclius, he signed his letter with two words that share the same root meaning, SLM, both derived from that root word, but the intent of that signature was surrender or face war. Hardly a term for peace. It's now time to look at the sources of Islam and its history to determine whether Islam does indeed advocate violence. Indeed, I would agree with that. Exactly why we're going to go into the centerfold of this pamphlet now. Now we come to this verse on the very inside fold of the pamphlet. We find this verse that I quoted earlier. If anyone slew a person, unless it be for murder or for spreading mischief in the land, it would be as if he slew the whole of people. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of the whole people. Al-Quran 5:32. Well, first of all, the first thing we notice if you pick up a Quran and actually read this verse that is being quoted here, you notice that the verse is quoted incompletely in this pamphlet. Why would they quote the verse incompletely? Well, let me read to you the complete verse and you'll see immediately why they would do that. Surah 5, Surah Al-Ma'idah, Ayah 32, says, because of that, we ordained for the children of Israel. We ordained for who? We ordained for the children of Israel. So this is the command to the children of Israel. That if anyone killed a person not in retaliation of murder or to spread mischief in the land, it would be as if he killed all mankind. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of all mankind. And indeed, there came to them our messengers with clear proofs, evidences, and signs. Even then, after that, many of them continue to exceed the limits. So we see right away that this is not specifically a command to Muslims, it's a command to the children of Israel. Now what's interesting is when you study the source of this verse, this was not a verse that was given to Muhammad. Now, Muhammad plagiarized much of the Quran, and we can trace the source of this verse back to a work of antiquity that he plagiarized this very verse from. This verse can be found in the Jewish Mishnah Sanhedrin, and it's actually a scribal commentary on Genesis chapter 4, verse 10, the story of Cain and Abel. In Genesis 4:10, God says to Cain, your brother's blood cries out from the ground. And this Jewish scribe makes a margin note, makes a commentary note saying, when he says blood, he means bloods, which means if anyone slays one person, it would be as if he slew all of mankind. And if a person were to save the life of one, it would be as if he saved all of mankind. We find almost the verbatim, word by word commentary that this Jewish scribe made, documented in the Mishnah Sanhedrin, inserted in the Quran in Surah 5, verse 32. Plagiarized. But what's even more interesting is Muslims refuse to read the very next verse, Surah 5:33, because if they did, you would see that 5:32 is not at all talking about peace, not at all talking about saving lives. 5:33 says, the recompense of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and do mischief in the land is only that they shall be killed or crucified, or their hands and their feet shall be cut off from opposite sides, or be exiled from the land. That is their disgrace in this world, and a great torment is theirs in the hereafter. Now you notice I'm reading from the Noble Quran, the official Quran from the Saudi Arabian printing press, King Fahd printing press. So I'm reading the Quran that most Muslims would view as authoritative. And 5:33 says, those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger or do mischief in the land are to be killed or crucified, or have their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides. What does it mean to do mischief in the land? We find the same phrase back in verse 32, the one that we mentioned a moment ago. We ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone killed a person not in retaliation of murder or for spreading mischief in the land. Which means those who spread mischief in the land can be killed justifiably. Those who wage war against Allah's Messenger can be killed justifiably. So what does it mean to wage mischief in the land? What is justifiably killing somebody according to the Quran, according to Surah 5:32 and Surah 5:33? Well, to answer that question, we simply need to go to another source of Islam, another authoritative source, which is the Tafsir of Ibn Kathir. One of many tafsirs. Tafsirs are commentaries on the Quran written by Islamic scholars. The Tafsir of Ibn Kathir happens to be a very well-respected tafsir. And Ibn Kathir tells us what spreading mischief in the land actually entails. It says this ayah, referring back to ayah 2, verse 27, because we find the same phrase mentioned there. The phrase is mischief in the land in ayah 227. And Ibn Kathir defines what that term means for us. He says, it is said of this ayah that it is about the disbelievers and the hypocrites among the people of the book. People of the book, that's me. I'm a person of the book. Jews and Christians in the Quran are referred to as people of the book because God gave them previous revelations in scripture form. In this case, the covenant that they broke is the pledge that Allah took from them in the Torah to follow Muhammad when he is sent as a prophet and to believe in him and in what he was sent with. So the pledge, according to the Quran, Christians and Jews, particularly Jews, but other people of the book as well, pledged to God to accept Muhammad as a prophet because he's foretold in the Torah. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, Muslims say is a foretelling of Muhammad in the Old Testament. And because Jews and Christians refused to accept Muhammad as a prophet, they broke the covenant with Allah, thereby spreading mischief in the land. So according to Surah 5, verse 32 and Surah 5, verse 33, anybody who spreads mischief in the land, according to verse 532, can be righteously killed. And according to Surah 533, the very next verse, may be killed, may be crucified, or have their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides. So, this verse hardly seems to be talking about a peaceful religion that is that is against terrorism, against unjustified killing. In fact, the very verse that they use to justify that it's peaceful says entirely the opposite when you look at it in context. It's not talking about peaceful Islam at all. It's not talking about saving the life of people. It's talking about who can be justifiably killed. Those who wage war against Allah or His messenger, or those who spread mischief in the land. Spreading mischief in the land is not believing that Muhammad was the messenger of God, because Christians and Jews were foretold in their books and their scriptures. In Deuteronomy 18:18, in John 14:16, that Muhammad was coming as a prophet. And when Jews and Christians rejected Muhammad as a prophet, they are spreading mischief in the land, therefore they may be killed. I'm only quoting Islam's own sources here. Misconceptions of jihad. So it says, jihad is literally an act of struggling. It talks about the root word in Arabic from which jihad is derived, mujahada. Which, when you look at it in an Arabic dictionary, actually does mean struggling. It means to strive in the way of Allah, to strive to please Allah. It says, thus jihad primarily refers to the inner struggle of a person of virtue and submission to God in all aspects of life. According to the Encyclopedia of Islam, let me read to you what Islam's own authorities define jihad as. Not simply an internal spiritual struggle. Listen to this. The Encyclopedia of Islam says of jihad, it defines it this way: in law, according to the general doctrine and in historical tradition, jihad consists of military action with the object of the expansion of Islam and, if need be, its defense. So right away we see something entirely different than what this tract seems to suggest jihad is. This tract is suggesting that jihad is merely an inner spiritual struggle to be a good person, to be a better person, to try to be more spiritually in tune with God and submissive to God and submissive to God's will. Nothing more. But according to Islam's own sources, Islam primarily is defined as warfare with the object of the expansion of Islam. That's its primary role. Secondary role, if needed, in defense of Islam. Even beyond that, let me read you another Islamic source that tells us exactly what jihad is. This is a manual of Shafi Sharia law. Shafi is one of the four legal scholars, schools of legal thought in Islam. And this manual defines jihad this way. It says, jihad means to wage war against non-Muslims. It's etymologically derived from the word mujahada, signifying warfare to establish the religion. Did you get that? From Islam's own sources, jihad primarily is defined as warfare to establish the religion. Nothing to do with an internal spiritual struggle. Furthermore, scholars who have studied this area of jihad say essentially the same thing. David Cook wrote an extensive book on jihad. David Cook teaches religious studies at Rice University. He wrote this book a couple of years ago called Understanding Jihad. And let me quote to you what David Cook says about this idea of jihad being nothing more than an internal spiritual struggle versus jihad being armed conflict. He says, attempts to rewrite history occur solely in Western-authored presentations of jihad, or those with Western audiences as the primary focus. It is ironic, but the fact remains that few Muslim scholars, listen to this, it's ironic that few Muslim scholars or even apologists writing in non-European languages have ever made the exaggerated claims of jihad being simply an internal spiritual struggle. He goes on to say, those who write in Arabic or other Muslim majority languages realize that it is pointless to present jihad as anything other than militant warfare. In other words, anytime the word jihad is used in Muslim-speaking nations, it is automatically assumed to be talking about armed conflict with the object of advancing Islam. Nothing to do with internal spiritual struggle. That's nothing more than a westernized construct, sanitized for Western audiences, to distort the true meaning of jihad as it's understood in the Middle East today. Don't be swayed by garbage like this that you see coming out from these Islamic proselytism organizations. That's exactly why Islam is. Nothing more than a proselytism arm of the Islamic Circle of North America. And they're putting out this misinformation in these tracts to the general public, and most of the general public has no knowledge of how to refute these tracts or how to recognize the truth from the distortions within these tracts. So that's why I'm putting together this series of videos. Goes on to say that, however, regardless of how legitimate the cause may be, the glorious Quran never condones the killing of innocent people. Well, that may be, but what defines an innocent person? Here's one gentleman that I think clarifies that answer for us.
I just wonder why you won't condemn it when your own leader, Omar Bakri, said quite simply, I condemn the killing of innocent people on the 20th of July.
Yeah,
why won't you say what he said?
No, at the end of the day, innocent people, when we say innocent people, we mean Muslims. As far as non-Muslims are concerned, they have not accepted Islam. As far as we're concerned, that is a crime against God.
I want to be clear about what you're saying.
Now, getting back to the tract. The tract finally wraps up on the last pamphlet, or the last page of the tract, saying, let there be no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error, seeming to suggest that Islam will never compel somebody to become a Muslim. This is in direct contradiction to the common idea that Islam was spread by the sword. Islam is a violent religion. It has a history of converting people by the sword. And so this tract inserts this verse from the Quran, Surah 2, Ayah 256, to combat that particular idea that Islam is not violent, was never spread by the sword, because the Quran says, let there be no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error. Well, the problem is that particular verse was given very early in Muhammad's prophetic career. And it was abrogated later on by over 160 verses in the Quran which say just the opposite. There's a contradiction here. One verse in the Quran says, let there be no compulsion in religion. You can find many other peaceful verses in the Quran, but you can also find violent verses in the Quran. So who wins here? Who wins when there's an apparent contradiction in the Quran? Well, according to the doctrine of abrogation, which is found in Surah 16, verse 101, or Surah 2, verse 106, the author of the Quran is allowed to change his mind. He can give one revelation to Muhammad early, later overrule that revelation by another revelation which seems to contradict the earlier verse, seeming to suggest, and Muslim scholars will interpret it this way, that the later revelations, if they contradict earlier revelations, are the ones in full force today. Those earlier revelations have been abrogated. They have been set aside. They're no longer in effect. So when we find verses in the Quran, such as Surah 9, verse 5, or Surah 9, verse 29, Surah 9, verse 123, all these verses, Surah 47, verse 4, all these verses abrogate earlier peaceful verses in the Quran. Now it's true. The Quran does have peaceful verses and it does have violent verses. In fact, listen to this scholar, and this is an Arabic scholar, a Muslim scholar, talk about the seemingly contradictory nature of the Quran itself. Listen to what he has to say.
The Quran is like a big store, like a big supermarket. In this book, you are able to pick different answers. You are able to make peace according to the Quran. You are able to declare war according to the Quran. So many different voices come out of the Quran. Moderate people have their support in the verses of the Quran. Radical people have the same thing with different verses in the Quran.
So you see, by Islam's own authorities, Those who want to be peaceful can find peace in the Quran, can be justified in their stand on peace. Those who want to be violent can also be violent in the Quran, justifiably so. So this tract is nothing but misleading propaganda. What does Islam say about terrorism? The writers of this tract want you to believe that the Quran says nothing about terrorism, and that those who are committing violence in the name of Islam are doing so without justification. They cannot justify their actions in the Quran. Yet we just saw a moment ago by a scholar of Islam himself that those who do so with full authority of Scripture. Now let's wrap it all up. The Quran seems to be contradictory. That's because it is. The Quran may be peaceful. The Quran could be violent. It's a contradictory book. Would you want to follow a book that has internal contradictions in it? If you don't, come to the Bible. Now, Muslims believe that the Bible is full of contradictions. I can challenge every one of those contradictions. There are no contradictions in the Bible. The Bible is truth. The Quran is nothing but a bunch of distortions. The Quran is a bunch of borrowed material that Muhammad borrowed from different religious traditions in the Arabian Peninsula, from Judaism, from Christianity, from heretical Christian sects, from Zoroastrianism, from pagan Arabic customs, pre-Islamic pagan Arab customs. Threw it all into a bag, if you will, shook it up, dumped it out, and that's essentially what you have of the Quran. That's why there's a lot of internal inconsistencies and internal contradictions in the Quran. But if you want to follow somebody who is completely consistent, if you want to read a book that has a consistent message from the beginning to the end, come to the Bible. My Muslim friend, come to the Bible and read what the Bible says, because when you begin reading the Bible, you're going to find a message of peace. You're going to find a message of hope. You're going to find a message of love. You're going to find a God of love who loved you so much that He gave His only Son to be the sacrifice for your sins, so that you don't have to, as many people who result of terrorism do, you don't have to strap a bomb to yourself in order to have that complete assurance. Problem with Islam, the only way a Muslim can have complete assurance is to sacrifice their own blood as a martyr in an act of jihad. You don't have to do that. Jesus already did that for you. He shed His blood so you don't have to shed yours. Come home to the Bible. Come home to the God of the Bible who loves you. Come home to Jesus Christ, who paid the penalty for your sin. Come home to the Prince of Peace. If you want to know what real peace is, if you want to experience true peace in your life, meet the Prince of Peace. That's the only way you'll know true peace and comfort. Come home to the Bible. It's a great message.